The dust cloud rose like a living thing as the buckskin Mustang charged across the corral, wild eyes rolling white with fear. But Lucia Jameson stood her ground without so much as a flinch. She was 22 years old that spring of 1878, and every ranch hand within 100 miles of Fort Bowie, Arizona, had heard tales of the woman who could break a wild horse in half the time it took any man. The secret was not in the rope or the strength of her grip, but in something deeper that she could not quite put into words, something that lived in the space between her breath and the animal's heartbeat. The Mustang wheeled and kicked, sending dirt spraying across the wooden fence where 3 men sat watching. 2 of them were the usual spectators, ranch hands who had seen her work a dozen times before. The third was new, a tall cowboy with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water under cottonwood shade. He leaned forward with his forearms resting on the top rail, studying every movement she made with an intensity that prickled awareness across the back of her neck. Lucia did not acknowledge the attention. She had learned long ago that men watched her for 2 reasons, either to doubt her or to desire her, and neither one deserved her focus when she had a frightened animal to gentle. The buckskin mare circled again, foam beginning to fleck her golden coat, and Lucia took 3 slow steps to the left, angling her body just slightly away. Not a retreat, but an offering of space. The mare's ears flicked forward for the first time since entering the corral. "Easy now," Lucia said, her voice low and steady as creek water. "Nobody here wants to hurt you, just need you to understand that." The mare snorted, tossing her black mane, but her circles were growing smaller. Lucia could feel the shift in the air between them, that moment when fear began to give way to curiosity. She took another step, this time forward and to the side, moving in an arc rather than straight on. The mare watched but did not bolt. Another step. Another. The rope hung loose in Lucia's left hand, no threat, just a presence. "How long has she been at it?" The new cowboy asked one of the other men, his voice carrying across the corral. "About 10 minutes, came the reply. "Should have her saddled within the hour." The new man shook his head slowly, something like wonder crossing his features. "I have been working horses for 6 years, and I have never seen anything like this." Lucia allowed herself a small smile, though she kept her eyes on the mare. The buckskin had stopped circling entirely now and stood at the far end of the corral, sides heaving, watching Lucia with both eyes. That was good. Prey animals only used both eyes when they were starting to see something as more than a threat. Lucia raised her right hand slowly, palm out, fingers relaxed. The mare's nostrils flared, reading the wind for danger. "There is no shame in being afraid," Lucia told the horse, her voice carrying that same steady calm. "This world is big and frightening, and nothing makes sense when you are running on fear alone. But you are safe here, I promise you that." She took 5 more steps, closing the distance to 15 feet. The mare tensed but held her ground. Lucia could see the decision being made behind those dark eyes, the wild instinct warring with something else, something that horses were born knowing even if humans had forgotten. Trust was stronger than fear when it was offered freely. The mare took 1 step toward Lucia, then another. And then she was there, close enough that Lucia could feel the heat radiating from her sweat-dampened coat, close enough to smell the prairie grass and sage that still clung to her mane. Lucia reached up slowly and touched the mare's neck, just a whisper of contact, and felt the animal's racing heart begin to slow beneath her palm. "There you are," Lucia murmured. "There you are, beautiful girl." She spent the next 20 minutes simply standing with the mare, letting the animal grow accustomed to her presence, to the weight of her hand, to the sound of her voice. When she finally lifted the blanket and then the saddle, The mare shifted her weight nervously but did not bolt. When Lucia pulled the cinch tight, the buckskin huffed out a breath of resignation but stood steady. By the time Lucia swung up into the saddle, the mare-only Crow hopped twice before settling into a nervous walk around the corral. 45 minutes from the moment the wild horse had been turned loose in the pen to the moment Lucia brought her to a stop in front of the watching men, calm and responsive to the lightest touch of the reins. "I will be damned," one of the ranch hands said, shaking his head. "Every single time, Lucia, and it still looks like magic." "It is not magic," Lucia said, swinging down from the saddle and running a hand along the mare's shoulder. "It is just listening." "Well, whatever it is, the boss is going to be pleased as punch." The ranch hand grinned. "That makes 18 horses this month. You are going to put the rest of us out of work." Lucia laughed and led the mare toward the gate. The new cowboy hopped down from the fence and pulled it open for her, and she got her first close look at him. He was older than she had thought at first glance, probably around 25. With the kind of weathered face that came from years of hard work under an unforgiving sun. But his eyes were kind, and when he looked at her, it was not with doubt or hunger but with something that looked almost like respect. "That was remarkable," he said simply. "Thank you." Lucia led the mare past him toward the main barn. He fell into step beside her, matching her pace easily despite his longer stride. "I am Travis Fitzgerald," he said, pulling off his hat in a gesture that seemed more habit than calculation. "I just signed on with the ranch yesterday. The foreman said I should watch you work, that I might learn something about horse handling." "Did you learn anything?" Lucia asked, genuinely curious. Travis was quiet for a moment, considering. "I learned that I have been doing it all wrong," he said finally. "I was taught to break a horse's spirit first, to show them who was boss right from the start. But what you did in there, that was different. You did not break her at all. You just convinced her to trust you." Lucia felt a smile tug at the corner of her mouth. Most people never see the difference. "I would like to understand it better," Travis said. They had reached the barn now, and Lucia led the buckskin into an empty stall, removing the saddle and bridle with practiced efficiency. Travis leaned against the stall door, watching her work. "Would you be willing to teach me your way?" She turned to look at him fully then, studying his face for any sign of mockery or condescension. She found neither. What she saw instead was honest curiosity and a humility that was rare among men who made their living on horseback. "Why?" she asked. "You said you have been working horses for 6 years. That means you already know how to break them." "Breaking is not the same as understanding," Travis replied. "I can get a horse to accept a saddle, sure, but I have to fight them for every inch of ground. It takes me days, sometimes weeks, to get a truly wild one to settle. You did it in less than an hour, and that mare would follow you anywhere now. I can see it in the way she watches you." It was true. The buckskin had turned in her stall to face Lucia, ears pricked forward with interest rather than fear. Lucia reached out and scratched the mare's forehead, feeling the velvet soft coat beneath her fingers. "All right," she said. "I will teach you. But you have to understand that it is not just a set of techniques you can memorize. It is a way of thinking about horses, about what they need and how they see the world." "I am a fast learner," Travis said, and the smile he gave her was so genuinely hopeful that Lucia found herself smiling back despite her usual reserve around new ranch hands. "We will start tomorrow morning," she told him. "Be at the corrals an hour after sunrise. Bring patience and leave your ego in the bunkhouse." Travis laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the barn. "Yes, madam, I can do that." He settled his hat back on his head and tipped it to her before heading back toward the main yard. Lucia watched him go, then turned her attention back to the buckskin mare, checking her over for any signs of strain or injury from the day's work. But her mind kept drifting back to the new cowboy, to the genuine interest she had seen in his eyes, to the way he had listened when she spoke as if her words actually mattered. It was a dangerous thing, she reminded herself, to start noticing a man that way. Lucia had spent the last 4 years building her reputation at the Double Bar Ranch, proving herself capable in a world that wanted to dismiss her as a novelty at best and a nuisance at worst. Romance would only complicate things, would give the other ranch hands reason to whisper that she was distracted, that she had lost her edge. She could not afford that, not when she was finally starting to make real money, enough to think about maybe buying a small spread of her own someday. But when she closed her eyes that night in the small room she rented in Fort Bowie, she saw Travis Fitzgerald's face, saw the respect in his creek water eyes, and felt something warm unfurl in her chest, despite all her careful resolutions. The Arizona sunrise came in shades of rose and gold, painting the distant mountains in colors too beautiful for words. Lucia was already at the corrals when the sky began to lighten, checking the fence posts and gates, making sure everything was secure. She had selected a young sorrel gelding for the morning's lesson, a horse that was green but not entirely wild, skittish but not dangerous. Travis would need to learn the basics before she turned him loose on a truly untamed Mustang. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, the distinctive sound of boots on packed dirt. When she turned, Travis was striding toward her through the pearl-gray dawn light, looking alert and ready despite the early hour. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep but his eyes bright. "Where do you want me?" "Right now, I want you to just watch," Lucia said. She nodded toward the sorrel, who stood in the far corner of the corral, watching them with wary attention. "That is Copper. He was born on the ranch, but his mother died when he was just a few months old, so he never got properly socialized. He is 2 years old now, and nobody has been able to get close enough to halter him, let alone saddle him." Travis studied the young horse, taking in the tense posture, the ready-to-bolt stance. "What is the first step?" "The first step is understanding what he is afraid of," Lucia said. She climbed up to sit on the fence rail, gesturing for Travis to join her. "Horses are prey animals. Their entire survival instinct is built around one question. Is this thing going to eat me? When we come at them straight on, especially if we are carrying ropes and saddles, every instinct they have is screaming, yes, this is a predator, run." "So you approach from the side," Travis said slowly, remembering what he had observed the day before, "and you angle your body away." "Exactly. You make yourself less threatening. You give them space to think instead of just react." Lucia swung down from the fence into the corral, her movements smooth and unhurried. "Watch." She walked toward Copper, not in a straight line but in a gentle arc, her shoulders turned just slightly away from him. The gelding tensed, ears swiveling, but he did not bolt. Lucia took 3 steps and then stopped, giving him time to process her presence. 3 more steps. Another pause. The entire time she kept her breathing slow and even, kept her energy calm and low. "See how his head is up," Lucia called softly to Travis. "That means he is still on high alert. I need to wait for him to lower it, to show me he is starting to relax." It took another 5 minutes of patient advance and retreat before Copper's head finally dropped a few inches, his jaw working as if he were chewing, a sign of stress relief in horses. Lucia smiled and took 2 more steps forward. The gelding held his ground. "Now watch this," she said. She turned her back on Copper completely and walked away from him, moving toward the far side of the corral. Behind her, she heard the soft sound of hooves on dirt. When she glanced over her shoulder, Copper had taken 3 steps after her, curiosity beginning to override his fear. Travis let out a low whistle of amazement. "How did you know he would do that?" "Because I gave him the choice," Lucia said, still walking slowly away. "When you chase a horse, they run. When you walk away from them, sometimes they decide to follow. It reverses the predator-prey dynamic." She spent the next half-hour working with Copper, gradually building his confidence until she could stand beside him and run her hands over his neck and shoulders. Travis watched every moment, and when Lucia finally climbed back out of the corral, she found him scribbling notes in a small leather-bound journal. "What are you writing?" she asked, curious. "Everything," Travis said, not looking up from the page. "The way you moved, the timing of your pauses, the body language cues from the horse. I want to remember all of it." Something about the earnestness of his focus touched her. Most ranch hands would have watched for a few minutes and then declared they understood, too proud to admit they needed instruction. But Travis was different. He was genuinely trying to learn, genuinely interested in understanding rather than just performing. "Your turn," Lucia said. Travis looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Already? I thought I would watch for a few more days before trying it myself." "The only way to learn is by doing," Lucia told him. "I will be right here to guide you. Now get in there and see if you can approach Copper without making him bolt." She watched as Travis climbed over the fence and dropped into the corral. Copper's head shot up immediately, his entire body tensing. Travis froze, clearly remembering what Lucia had taught him about not being a threat. "Good," Lucia called. "Now angle your shoulders away from him, make yourself less direct." Travis shifted his stance, turning slightly sideways. Copper's ears flicked forward with interest. "Now walk, but not straight at him. Make an arc." Travis started moving, and Lucia's heart sank a little as she watched him. He was trying, she could see that, but his movements were stiff and self-conscious. He was thinking too hard, calculating every step instead of letting it flow naturally. Copper sensed the uncertainty and bolted to the far side of the corral, snorting his alarm. "It is all right," Lucia said as Travis stopped and turned to her with frustration written across his face. "You are trying too hard. You need to relax, let your body move naturally." "How can I relax when I am thinking about 20 different things at once?" Travis asked, running a hand through his dark hair. Lucia considered for a moment, then made a decision. She climbed back into the corral and walked over to Travis, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his green eyes, close enough to smell leather and sage and clean sweat. "Close your eyes," she said softly. Travis blinked at her. "What? Close your eyes. Trust me." He did, though she could see the uncertainty in the set of his shoulders. Lucia reached out and placed one hand lightly on his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart beneath her palm. "Take a deep breath," she instructed. "Feel it go all the way down into your belly. Good. Now let it out slowly. Again." She felt his heart beat slow as he breathed, felt the tension begin to drain from his frame. Her own pulse had picked up at the contact, at the intimacy of standing this close to him, but she pushed the awareness aside and focused on the lesson. "When you approach a horse, you are not thinking about your feet or your shoulders or where you are looking," Lucia said, her voice low and calm. "You are just breathing and being present. You are making yourself into something steady and safe, something the horse can trust." "Can you feel the difference?" "Yes," Travis said, and his voice had gone quiet, almost reverent. "I can feel it." "Good. Now open your eyes and try again, but keep that feeling. Do not think, just move." She stepped back, and Travis took another deep breath before turning toward Copper. This time when he walked, there was a fluidity to his movement that had been missing before, a natural grace that came from being in his body instead of trapped in his head. Copper watched him come, still wary but no longer panicked. Travis made it within 10 feet of the gelding before Copper finally retreated, and even then it was not a terrified bolt but a cautious withdrawal. When Travis turned back to Lucia, there was genuine joy on his face. "I felt it," he said, excitement making his words tumble over each other. "I felt the moment when he almost let me get closer. It was like something shifted in the air between us." "That is exactly right," Lucia said, unable to keep from smiling at his enthusiasm. "That is the connection you are looking for. Once you can find it consistently, the rest becomes much easier." They worked together for another hour, with Lucia coaching Travis through the subtle adjustments in posture and energy that made all the difference. By the time the sun had climbed high enough to turn the day hot, Travis had managed to get close enough to Copper to touch his shoulder, just briefly before the gelding shied away. "That was amazing," Travis said as they walked back toward the main ranch buildings together, both of them dusty and tired but energized by the morning's progress. "I never understood before that horses were reading us as much as we are reading them." "Most people never do," Lucia said. "They think of horses as things to be dominated rather than partners to be understood." "How did you learn all this?" Travis asked. "Did someone teach you, or did you figure it out on your own?" Lucia was quiet for a moment, memories rising up like dust devils in her mind. "My father," she said finally. "He was a horse trader, worked with wild Mustangs all across New Mexico and Arizona. I grew up watching him gentle horses that other men said were unbreakable. He always said that horses would teach you everything you needed to know if you were quiet enough to listen." "He sounds like a wise man." "He was." The past tense sat heavy on her tongue. "He died 4 years ago, pneumonia. After that, I needed work, and the only thing I knew was horses. The double bar took a chance on me, and I have been here ever since." "I am sorry about your father," Travis said, and there was genuine sympathy in his voice, not the empty platitudes she had grown accustomed to hearing. "It must have been hard, losing him and having to make your own way." "It was," Lucia admitted, "but he taught me well, and the work helps. When I am with the horses, I can still hear his voice sometimes, telling me to slow down, to breathe, to trust what the animal is showing me." They had reached the bunkhouse now, where several other ranch hands were lounging in the shade, escaping the midday heat. One of them, a stocky man named Garrett, called out as they approached. Well, looks like the new fellow is getting private lessons from the ranch's prize attraction," Garrett said, his tone making it clear he did not mean it as a compliment. "You planning to steal all her secrets, Fitzgerald, or are you just enjoying the view?" Lucia felt her jaw tighten, but before she could respond, Travis had stepped forward, his posture gone suddenly cold and dangerous. "Miss Jameson is the finest horse trainer I have ever seen, and I am grateful she is willing to share her knowledge," Travis said, his voice level but hard as iron. "If you have got a problem with that, Garrett, we can discuss it somewhere private." Garrett held up his hands in mock surrender, though his smirk did not fade. "No problem at all, friend. Just making conversation." "Make better conversation," Travis suggested, then turned back to Lucia with an apologetic look. "Same time tomorrow morning." "Same time," Lucia agreed, warmth spreading through her chest at the way he had stood up for her without hesitation. Most men would have laughed along with Garrett's insinuation, or worse, would have made their own crude jokes. But Travis had defended her honor as naturally as breathing, and that meant more than he probably realized. She watched him head into the bunkhouse, then turned toward the small house where she boarded with the ranch foreman's elderly mother, a kindly woman named Mrs. Chen, who had emigrated from China 30 years earlier and now cooked for the ranch hands. The house smelled of ginger and frying pork when Lucia entered, and she found Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, her weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency as she prepared the midday meal. "You look happy," Mrs. Chen observed, glancing up from her work with knowing eyes. "The new cowboy, he is a good student." Lucia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He is very dedicated to learning." Mrs. Chen said, her tone suggesting she saw right through Lucia's careful neutrality. "And very handsome, yes. Good shoulders, kind eyes." "Mrs. Chen," Lucia protested, laughing despite herself. "I am old, not blind," the older woman said serenely. "And I see the way you smile when you talk about him. That is good. You work too hard, spend too much time alone. A little romance is good for the soul." "I cannot afford romance right now," Lucia said, the words coming out more sharply than she intended. "I am trying to save money, build a future. Getting involved with someone would only complicate things." Mrs. Chen made a dismissive sound and waved her spatula. "Life is already complicated. Love does not make it more complicated, it makes it worth living. You think I wanted to fall in love with my husband when I first came to this country? I had plans too, dreams of making my fortune. But then I met him, and I learned that having someone to share your life with is worth more than all the money in the world." Lucia wanted to argue, but she could not quite find the words. Instead, she helped Mrs. Chen finish preparing the meal, letting the familiar rhythm of the work settle her jangled thoughts. That night, lying in her narrow bed with moonlight spilling through the window, Lucia let herself think about Travis Fitzgerald. She thought about the way he listened when she spoke, truly listened, as if her words were something precious. She thought about the strength in his hands and the kindness in his eyes, and the way he had defended her without a moment's hesitation. And she thought about how long it had been since anyone had looked at her the way he did, with respect and interest and something that might, given time, grow into affection. It was dangerous, she reminded herself again. It was foolish. But as she drifted toward sleep, she could not quite bring herself to care. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that Lucia had not known she was craving. Every morning, she met Travis at the corrals as the sun painted the desert sky in impossible colors. She taught him about reading a horse's body language, about the difference between fear and aggression, about how to gentle even the most traumatized animal with patience and understanding. And every day, Travis absorbed it all like parched earth soaking up rain, asking thoughtful questions, practicing tirelessly, never satisfied with good enough when he could push himself toward better. But something else was happening too, something that had nothing to do with horses and everything to do with the way Travis made her laugh when he told stories about his childhood in Texas, or the way he always seemed to know when she needed help with a particularly difficult horse without her having to ask, or the way his eyes followed her across the ranch yard with an expression that made her heart beat faster. It was the middle of July, the heat pressing down like a physical weight, when things shifted between them. Lucia was working with a black mare that had been beaten by her previous owner, and the animal was so skittish that even Lucia's gentle approach was not making much progress. She had been in the corral for over an hour, and frustration was beginning to fray the edges of her usual patience. "Take a break," Travis called from his perch on the fence. "You are pushing too hard." "I almost have her," Lucia insisted, though she knew he was right. The mare was not responding, because Lucia's own agitation was bleeding into her energy, making her unpredictable in the horse's eyes. "Lucia," Travis said, and there was something in his voice that made her stop and look at him. He had dropped down into the corral and was walking toward her, not toward the mare but toward her. "You taught me that you cannot force a connection. You have to let it happen naturally. That applies to you too." He was right in front of her now, close enough that she could see the concern in his eyes, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the summer heat. "You care so much," Travis said softly, "about every horse, every animal that crosses your path. You pour your whole heart into helping them, and it is one of the things I admire most about you. But sometimes caring too much can be its own kind of obstacle. Sometimes you have to step back and trust that the connection will happen when both parties are ready." Lucia felt something crack open inside her chest, some wall she had been maintaining without even realizing it. "Are we still talking about the horse?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Travis smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "I am talking about whatever you want me to be talking about." "Travis, I cannot," she started, but he shook his head gently. "I am not asking you for anything," he said. "I just want you to know that I see you. Not just the horse trainer, not just the woman who can do in an hour what takes other men days. I see Lucia Jameson, the person who hums old ballads while she brushes down the horses at the end of the day, who saves half her lunch to feed the barn cats, who cares so fiercely about everything she touches that it scares her sometimes. I see you, and I think you are remarkable." Tears stung Lucia's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "I do not cry," she said, which was a stupid thing to say when there were clearly tears on her cheeks. But Travis just smiled and reached up to brush them away with his thumb, his touch so gentle it made her ache. "It is all right to let someone care about you," he said. "It does not make you weak. It does not mean you are losing yourself. It just means you are brave enough to let someone in." Lucia looked up at him, at this man who had come into her life asking to learn her ways and had somehow ended up teaching her things she had not known she needed to learn. And she made a choice. She rose up on her toes and kissed him, soft and brief and full of all the things she could not quite put into words. When she pulled back, Travis was staring at her with wonder written across his face. "I have been wanting to do that since the first day I saw you," he admitted. "But I did not want to presume." "Consider yourself informed that presuming would be welcome," Lucia said. And then she was laughing and he was laughing, and they were standing in the middle of the corral in the blazing July sun, grinning at each other like fools. Behind them, the black mare nickered softly, and when Lucia turned, she found the horse had approached to within 5 feet, her dark eyes curious rather than fearful. "Well, look at that," Travis said. "Seems like stepping back and letting things happen naturally works after all." Lucia shook her head, still smiling, and turned her attention back to the mare. This time when she extended her hand, the horse sniffed it cautiously, then allowed Lucia to stroke her neck. The breakthrough had come, as they always did, in the moment when Lucia had stopped forcing and started trusting. After that day, everything changed and nothing changed. They still met every morning at the corrals. They still worked with the horses, with Lucia teaching and Travis learning, and both of them growing more skilled with each passing day. But now there were stolen moments too. A kiss in the shadow of the barn when no one was looking, fingers intertwined as they walked back from checking the fence line at dusk, quiet conversations late into the night when Travis would slip away from the bunkhouse to meet her in the space between the house and the corrals, where they could talk without being overheard. Lucia learned that Travis had grown up on a small ranch outside San Antonio, the youngest of 4 brothers. He had left home at 19 to see more of the world, to prove himself as his own man rather than just another Fitzgerald boy. He had worked on ranches across Texas and New Mexico, always moving, always searching for something he could not quite name. "I think I was looking for this," he told her one night, lying on his back in the grass beside her, staring up at the impossible sprawl of stars overhead. "This feeling of being exactly where I am supposed to be, with exactly who I am supposed to be with." You cannot know that after just a few weeks, Lucia said, though her heart was singing at his words. Cannot I? Travis turned his head to look at her, and even in the darkness she could see the certainty in his eyes. I have been alive for 24 years, Lucia. I have met a lot of people, been a lot of places, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. That has to mean something. It meant everything, but Lucia was still afraid to say it out loud, as if speaking the words would somehow break the spell and send him riding off toward the horizon like every other good thing in her life that had proven temporary. So instead she kissed him, pouring all her hope and fear and desperate, growing love into the press of her mouth against his. And Travis kissed her back with a tenderness that made her believe, just for a moment, that maybe this time things could be different. August arrived with temperatures that turned the desert into a furnace, and with it came a new challenge. The ranch owner, a gruff but fair man named Samuel Henderson, called Lucia into his office one morning with news that there was a buyer interested in purchasing a string of 20 wild Mustangs, but only if they could be broken and ready for riding within 6 weeks. That is a tight timeline, Lucia said, doing the math in her head. Even working sunrise to sunset, I am not sure I can handle that many horses that quickly on my own. That is why I am assigning Fitzgerald to work with you full-time, Henderson said, leaning back in his chair. He has been impressing the hell out of the other hands with how much he has learned from you these past 2 months. I figure between the two of you, you can get it done. Lucia felt a mix of excitement and trepidation at the prospect of spending that much time working closely with Travis. Excitement because she loved being around him, loved the easy partnership they had developed. Trepidation because keeping their relationship quiet was going to be much harder when they were together all day, every day. But she agreed, because turning down the work was not an option, and because, if she was being honest with herself, she wanted the excuse to spend more time with Travis even if it meant risking discovery. The next 6 weeks were the hardest and the happiest of Lucia's life. She and Travis worked from before dawn until well after dark, moving through the string of Mustangs with an efficiency born of their growing partnership. Travis had learned well, and while he still did not have Lucia's instinctive gift for reading horses, he had developed enough skill that he could handle the gentler animals on his own, while Lucia focused on the ones with more trauma or aggression. They developed a rhythm, a way of moving around each other in the corrals that was almost like a dance. Lucia would start a horse, getting them calm enough to accept a halter and lead rope, and then Travis would take over the next phase, getting them accustomed to the saddle blanket and saddle. Then Lucia would do the first ride, since she was lighter and the horses tended to accept her weight more easily. And finally, Travis would ride them, getting them used to a heavier rider. By the time they were done, each horse was calm, responsive, and ready for a new owner to continue their training. But the work was exhausting, both physically and emotionally. By the end of the 4th week, they had completed 15 of the 20 horses, but Lucia could feel the strain wearing on her. Her hands were raw from rope burn despite the gloves she wore. Her body ached from the constant physical demand of the work. And her heart felt too full, stretched too tight with the love she was carrying for Travis and the fear that at any moment it could all fall apart. It was Travis who noticed when she started to flag. Travis who insisted they take a break one afternoon when the heat was at its worst, and the horses were too tired to work with anyway. He brought her to a spot along the creek that ran through the eastern edge of the ranch property, where cottonwood trees provided shade, and the water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. "Sit," he commanded, and Lucia was too tired to argue. She sank down onto the bank and let the cool air rising from the water wash over her heated skin. Travis sat beside her and pulled off his boots, then waded into the creek until the water reached his knees. He cupped his hands and brought the water up to splash over his face and neck, and Lucia watched the droplets catch the sunlight like diamonds. "Come on," he said, turning back to grin at her. "The water feels amazing." Lucia hesitated, then decided she did not care about propriety or what anyone might think if they saw her. She pulled off her own boots and stockings and waded in, gasping as the cold water shocked her system after the blazing heat of the day. Travis reached for her hand and pulled her deeper, until they were both standing in water up to their waists, the current tugging gently at their clothes. And then he was pulling her close, wrapping his arms around her waist, and Lucia went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," Travis said, the words quiet but clear over the sound of the running water. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for a few months, but I love you, Lucia Jameson, and I needed you to know that." Lucia pulled back just enough to look up at him, and what she saw in his face took her breath away. There was no doubt there, no reservation, just pure and simple truth shining from his creek water eyes. "I love you too," she said, and saying it felt like finally setting down a weight she had been carrying for too long. "I have been trying to protect myself, but I cannot help it." "I love you, Travis Fitzgerald." He kissed her then, deep and slow and sweet, and Lucia kissed him back with her whole heart. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Travis rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Lucia went very still. "What?" "Marry me," Travis repeated. "I know it is sudden. I know you probably think I have lost my mind, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to work beside you every day. I want to build a life with you, a real life, not just stolen moments in the dark. Marry me, Lucia." "I do not have anything to offer you," Lucia said, even as her heart was screaming yes, yes, yes. "I do not have land or money or anything except my skill with horses." "You have everything I want," Travis said fiercely. "You have your strength and your kindness and your brilliant mind. You have your courage and your laugh and the way you see beauty in things that other people overlook. You are everything I want, Lucia. The rest is just details we can figure out together." Lucia looked at him, at this man who saw her so clearly, who valued her for exactly who she was, who was offering her not just love but partnership, not just passion but respect. And she realized that she had been afraid of the wrong thing. She had been afraid that love would make her weak, would cost her the independence she had fought so hard to build. But what Travis was offering was not a cage but a collaboration, not a surrender but a joining of strengths. "Yes," she said, and watched joy spread across his face like sunrise. "Yes, I will marry you." Travis let out a whoop of triumph that probably scared every animal within half a mile, then picked Lucia up and spun her around in the water, both of them laughing like children. When he finally set her down, he kissed her again, and Lucia felt something settle into place inside her chest, a rightness that she had been searching for without knowing it her entire life. They finished the string of Mustangs 2 days ahead of schedule, and Samuel Henderson was so pleased that he gave them both a generous bonus on top of their regular pay. Lucia tucked the money away carefully, already thinking about what it might go toward, what kind of future she and Travis might build together. They were married on a cool evening in late September, with the worst of the summer heat finally broken and the desert sky painted in shades of purple and gold. Mrs. Chen helped Lucia sew a simple dress of cream-colored cotton, and Travis wore his best shirt and a new string tie that he had bought special for the occasion. The ceremony was held in Fort Bowie's small chapel, with Mrs. Chen, and the ranch foreman standing as witnesses, and a traveling preacher performing the service. Lucia had never imagined herself as someone who would care about a wedding, but as she stood beside Travis and listened to him promise to love and honor her for the rest of his days, she found tears streaming down her face. When it was her turn to speak, her voice shook with emotion, but the words came clear and true. "I promise to stand beside you as an equal partner," she said, holding Travis's hands and looking into his eyes. "I promise to share my life with you, my hopes and my fears, my successes and my failures. I promise to love you with everything I am, for as long as I live." When the preacher pronounced them married and Travis kissed her, Lucia felt something shift in the world around her, as if the universe itself was rearranging to acknowledge this new bond they had created. The ranch hands threw them a party that night in the main barn, with music and dancing and more food than Lucia had seen in one place since she was a child. Even Garrett, who had been so dismissive of her at first, came by to shake Travis's hand and tell Lucia she had chosen a good man. As the night wore on, and Lucia danced with her new husband under strings of lanterns hung from the barn rafters, she felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. She had spent so long expecting loss, preparing for disappointment, that she hardly knew what to do with this feeling of absolute rightness. "What are you thinking about?" Travis asked, pulling her close as the music shifted to something slow and sweet. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest person alive," Lucia said honestly. "And I am trying not to be afraid that it will not last." Travis cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "I cannot promise you that nothing bad will ever happen," he said. "Life is uncertain and we both know that. But I can promise you that whatever comes, we will face it together. You are not alone anymore, Lucia. You will never be alone again." And for the first time in 4 years, since the morning she had watched her father's coffin being lowered into the cold ground, Lucia allowed herself to believe that might be true. They moved into a small house on the edge of the ranch property, a 2-room cabin that Samuel Henderson offered them at a reduced rent in recognition of their value to the operation. It was not much, just a bedroom and a main room that served as kitchen and living space, but Lucia loved it with a fierceness that surprised her. She loved the way the morning sun came through the eastern window and painted patterns on the floor. She loved the small fireplace where they could cook their meals and warm themselves on cold desert nights. Most of all, she loved that it was theirs, a space they had made together, a foundation for the future they were building. Travis proved to be as good a husband as he had been a student, helping with the cooking and cleaning without being asked, understanding that their partnership extended beyond the corrals to every aspect of their shared life. They settled into routines that felt both comfortable and exciting, waking before dawn to work with the horses, sharing meals that they prepared together, spending their evenings talking about their dreams for the future, or simply sitting in companionable silence, while Lucia mended tack and Travis carved small wooden figures as a hobby. Winter came to the Arizona desert, bringing cold nights and occasional frost that turned the landscape into something briefly magical. Lucia and Travis continued their work with the ranch's horses, and word of their skill began to spread. Ranchers from as far away as Tucson started bringing their problem horses to the double bar, willing to pay premium prices for Lucia's gentle methods and the results they produced. By the time spring arrived again, Lucia and Travis had saved enough money that they began to seriously discuss the possibility of buying their own land. They spent their rare free hours riding out to look at parcels for sale, dreaming about what kind of ranch they might build together. Lucia wanted space for breeding and training horses, using the methods her father had taught her, and she had refined. Travis talked about maybe raising cattle too, diversifying their income so they would not be dependent on any single source of revenue. It was on one of these exploratory rides that they found the perfect spot, a beautiful stretch of land about 15 miles north of Fort Bowie, with a year-round spring, good grass, and enough space for everything they had dreamed about. The price was higher than they had hoped, but the owner was willing to hold the property for 6 months if they could put down a deposit. "We can do this," Travis said, his hand tight on Lucia's as they stood looking out over what might someday be their ranch. "We just need to take on more horses, work a little harder, save every penny we can. We can do this." And they did. Over the next 6 months, Lucia and Travis pushed themselves harder than ever before, taking on every job they could find, working horses that other trainers had given up on, building a reputation that stretched across the entire territory. It was exhausting work, but it was also deeply satisfying, and they did it all together, supporting each other through the frustrations and celebrating the victories as a team. There were hard moments, too. A mare that Lucia had been working with for weeks suddenly kicked out in fear and caught Travis in the ribs, cracking 2 of them and leaving him barely able to breathe for days. A brutal heat wave in July that killed 3 of the Mustangs they had been contracted to break, animals that had survived in the wild for years only to succumb to the combination of stress and temperature. A terrifying week when Lucia came down with influenza, and Travis sat by her bedside, bathing her burning skin with cool water and refusing to leave her side even when Mrs. Chen warned him he would likely catch it himself. But through it all, they held onto each other and onto the dream that kept them moving forward. And in late October of 1879, just over a year after their wedding, they signed the papers that made them the owners of 160 acres of Arizona territory, complete with a small adobe house that needed work but was structurally sound. The day they moved in was one of the happiest of Lucia's life. It was not much yet, just the house and the land and the 2 horses they had brought with them. But it was theirs. They had built this with their own hands, their own skill, their own determination and love. That night they lay together in the bedroom of their new home, exhausted but exhilarated, and Travis pulled Lucia close against his chest. "We did it," he said, wonder in his voice. "We actually did it." "We did," Lucia agreed, smiling into the darkness, "and this is just the beginning." She was right. Over the next 2 years they built the Fitzgerald ranch into something remarkable. They constructed corrals and a barn, fenced pastures, and brought in breeding stock, carefully selecting horses that showed both good conformation and the calm temperament that Lucia valued. Word of their operation spread, and soon they had a waiting list of people who wanted horses trained in their gentle style. Travis proved to have a good head for the business side of things, keeping careful records and managing their finances with a prudence that allowed them to grow steadily without overextending themselves. Lucia focused on the training, developing a program that could handle multiple horses at various stages of development simultaneously. And together, they created something that was more than just a ranch. It was a testament to what 2 people could accomplish when they worked in perfect partnership. In the summer of 1881, Lucia discovered she was pregnant. The news came as both a joy and a terror. She had seen too many women die in childbirth, had lost her own mother that way when she was just 7 years old. But Travis held her when she cried about her fears and promised that they would get through it together, just like they had gotten through everything else. Mrs. Chen came to stay with them as Lucia's time drew near, bringing her knowledge of herbs and traditional remedies that had helped countless women through the ordeal of childbirth. And on a cold January morning in 1882, after 12 hours of labor that left Lucia convinced she was going to die, their son came into the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the desert dawn. They named him Samuel Jacob Fitzgerald, after the ranch owner who had given them their start and after Lucia's father. He was perfect, with Travis's green eyes and Lucia's dark hair, and Lucia fell in love with him so instantly and completely that it took her breath away. Being parents changed them in ways both expected and surprising. Travis proved to be utterly devoted to his son, spending hours just watching Samuel sleep or holding him while Lucia caught desperately needed rest. Lucia found depths of tenderness in herself that she had not known existed, a fierce protective love that made her understand her own father's devotion in ways she never had before. But they were also exhausted and overwhelmed, and sometimes uncertain if they were doing anything right. Samuel was a fussy baby, prone to crying fits that lasted for hours and left both his parents feeling helpless and inadequate. The ranch work did not stop just because they had an infant to care for, and they struggled to balance the demands of their business with the needs of their child. It was Mrs. Chen who saved them, moving into the small guest room they had added onto the house the previous year, and taking over much of Samuel's care during the day so that Lucia and Travis could continue working with the horses. She sang to him in Chinese, taught him to sleep through the night, and gave his exhausted parents the support they desperately needed. Slowly, they found their rhythm again. Lucia learned to work with Samuel strapped to her back in a carrier Mrs. Chen had made, and the baby seemed to find the motion of his mother walking among the horses soothing. Travis rigged up a shaded area near the corrals where Samuel could sleep safely while they worked, and they took turns checking on him throughout the day. By the time Samuel was 6 months old, they had settled into something that felt sustainable. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They hired their first employee, a young man fresh from Mexico who was eager to learn and had a natural affinity for horses. With the extra help, Lucia and Travis could take on even more training contracts, and their savings began to grow again after the expenses of pregnancy and childbirth. When Samuel was a year old, they threw a party to celebrate, inviting everyone who had supported them along the way. The ranch yard filled with friends and neighbors, with music and laughter, and the kind of joy that comes from a community gathered in celebration. Lucia stood with Travis, watching their son toddle unsteadily across the grass while people cheered him on, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "I never imagined this," she told Travis quietly. "When I was 22 and breaking horses at the double bar trying to prove I was worth taking seriously, I never imagined I could have this. A home, a family, a life that feels full and complete." Travis pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "You deserve all of this and more," he said. "You deserve every happiness, Lucia." The years continued to unfold, bringing new challenges and new joys. When Samuel was 3, Lucia gave birth to their daughter, Rebecca, an easier baby who seemed to arrive already knowing her place in the world. 2 years after that came another son, Thomas, who had his father's easy smile and his mother's fearless nature. The ranch continued to thrive, expanding to include a breeding program that produced some of the finest horses in the territory. They bought adjacent parcels of land as they became available, growing their holdings until they had nearly 500 acres under fence. They built a proper ranch house to replace the small adobe, though Lucia insisted on keeping the original structure as a guest house because it held too many precious memories to abandon. Travis taught all three children to ride almost as soon as they could walk, and Lucia taught them to listen to horses the way her father had taught her. Samuel, the oldest, proved to have his mother's gift for connecting with even the most difficult animals. Rebecca was less interested in the horses and more fascinated by the business side of things, often sitting with her father while he did the ranch accounts and asking questions that showed a sharp mathematical mind. Thomas was the adventurer, always pushing boundaries and testing limits, keeping his parents on their toes. There were losses, too. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep when Samuel was 8, and Lucia mourned her as deeply as she had mourned her own father, this woman who had become her family when she needed it most. Samuel Henderson died the following year, and they traveled to his funeral and wept for the man who had taken a chance on a young woman who just wanted to prove she could work horses as well as any man. But through it all, Lucia and Travis held onto each other and onto the love that had started with a simple request: teach me your way. They had taught each other so much more than horse training in the years since that first morning in the corral. They had taught each other about trust and partnership, about how two people could build something greater than either could achieve alone, about how love was not a weakness but the strongest foundation on which to build a life. On their 20th wedding anniversary, they stood together at the edge of their property, watching the sun set over the desert they both loved. The ranch house behind them was full of noise and laughter, their three children hosting a celebration dinner with friends and neighbors. But for just this moment, Lucia and Travis had stolen away to be alone together, to remember where they had started and marvel at where they had ended up. "You remember the first time I asked you to teach me," Travis said, his arm around Lucia's waist, her head resting on his shoulder. "I remember thinking you were either very brave or very foolish to ask a woman for help," Lucia said, smiling at the memory. "Most men were too proud." "I was never too proud to recognize someone who knew more than I did," Travis replied. "And you knew everything that mattered. You still do." Lucia turned in his arms to face him, looking up at the man who had been her student, her partner, her love for 2 decades now. There was gray in his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but he was still the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "We built a good life," she said softly. "Your dreams and mine woven together into something real and lasting." "The best life," Travis agreed. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of the accumulated tenderness of 20 years of marriage. "And it just keeps getting better." From the house behind them came the sound of their daughter calling that dinner was ready, and they turned to walk back together, hand in hand, the way they had walked through every joy and sorrow the years had brought them. Years continued to pass in a steady rhythm of seasons and milestones. Samuel grew into a fine horseman who eventually married a schoolteacher from Tucson and brought her home to the ranch, where they built their own house on the eastern corner of the property and started their own family. Rebecca attended a business college in Phoenix, one of the first women to do so, and returned with ideas for expanding the ranch's operations that proved remarkably successful. Thomas, true to his adventurous nature, spent several years working on ranches across the West before finally settling down with a sharp-tongued woman he met in Colorado, bringing her back to Arizona, where she fit into the family as if she had always belonged. Lucia and Travis watched their children build their own lives with a mixture of pride and bittersweet recognition that time was moving forward, that the children they had raised were now adults with dreams and plans of their own. But there was joy in it, too, in seeing the values they had instilled take root and flourish in the next generation. The ranch they had built together became something of a legend in the territory, and later, after 1912, in the new state of Arizona. People came from across the Southwest to buy horses trained in the Fitzgerald method, and several of their children and grandchildren went on to establish their own training operations, spreading the gentle techniques that Lucia had learned from her father and refined through years of patient work. On a warm spring evening in 1915, Lucia and Travis sat together on the porch of the ranch house they had built, watching the sun paint the desert sky in shades of amber and rose. They were both in their late 50s now, still active and engaged in the ranch work, but beginning to let the younger generation take on more of the daily responsibilities. "You ever think about that first morning?" Lucia asked, her hand in Travis's, their fingers interlaced in a gesture so familiar it was almost unconscious. "When you showed up at the corrals and asked me to teach you." "I think about it all the time," Travis said. "I think about how close I came to not asking, to just watching for a few days, and then moving on to the next ranch, the next job. My whole life would have been different if I had let pride or fear keep me from asking for help." "My life too," Lucia said softly. "I was so determined to need no one, to prove I could do everything on my own. If you had not come along and shown me that partnership was not weakness but strength, I would have spent my whole life alone and probably convinced myself I was happy that way." Travis raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture he had made thousands of times over their decades together, but which still made Lucia's heart flutter. "Best decision I ever made, asking you to teach me your way. Best decision I ever made was saying yes," Lucia replied. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead, the desert cooling around them, the sounds of the ranch settling for the night, a familiar symphony. From somewhere, inside the house, came the sound of their grandchildren playing, the high, sweet laughter of innocence and joy. Life had given them so much more than either had dared to dream that morning in 1878, when a cowboy had watched a woman gentle a wild horse and recognized something worth learning. Lucia thought about all of it, all the years and all the moments that had brought them here. She thought about the horses she had gentled, the children she had raised, the legacy she and Travis had built together. And she thought about the truth she had learned, the truth her father had tried to teach her, and which Travis had helped her finally understand. That the bravest thing you could do was not to stand alone but to reach out your hand and trust someone to take it, to build something together that neither could create on their own. "I love you," she said to Travis, the words as true now as they had been that day in the creek when he had first said them to her. "I love you too," Travis replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that, for as long as we both shall live." And sitting there on the porch of the life they had built together, surrounded by family and legacy and love, Lucia Jameson Fitzgerald knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with. And that was the greatest gift she could have ever asked for. The ranch continued to operate for generations, a testament to what two people who loved each other, and the land and the animals in their care could create when they worked in true partnership. And though Lucia and Travis eventually passed into memory, their story lived on in the gentle method still taught to every new generation of horse trainers, in the descendants who carried their names and their values forward, and in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest lessons come not from standing alone but from being brave enough to ask someone to teach you their way, and wise enough to learn when they do.